The first time someone called my husband a pet to his face, he smiled, offered the man a drink, and complimented his armor. My cheeks burned silver with shame. My fists tightened at my sides. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to step forward and defend my husband's honor. But Corbin just stood there with that quiet, patient smile of his and said, "That's a beautiful set of shoulder plates, Commander. Is that fourth-era craftsmanship?" The etching along the spine guard is remarkable. Rothek blinked. He had expected anger, or tears, or the stumbling silence of a creature that knew its place. Instead, he got a genuine question about his armor, from a man who seemed completely unbothered by the worst insult a Thelasari could offer. It threw him off balance for just a moment, and in that moment, I saw something flicker behind Rothek's eyes. Not respect. Confusion. The particular confusion of a predator that bites down and finds no fear in its prey. The moment passed. Rothek laughed, took the drink, and turned his back on my husband to speak with someone who mattered. The room moved on, the whispers continued, and Corbin returned to my side, placed his hand gently on my lower back, and asked if I wanted more tea. That was my husband. That was the man I married. I should explain how a Thelasari noblewoman ended up bound in union to a human. My people, the Thelasari, are an old civilization. We were building starships when humans were still arguing over who owned which patch of dirt on their single planet. Our culture is built on lineage, on strength, on the unbroken chain of blood that connects every noble house to the founders who carved our empire from the darkness between stars. We measure worth by conquest, by the sharpness of one's claws, by the weight of victories carried in one's name. Humans have none of these things. They are small, they are fragile, they have no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. Their bones break easily. Their skin tears at the lightest touch. When they first appeared on the galactic stage, most of the elder civilizations dismissed them as a curiosity. Clever, perhaps. Resourceful, in the way that small scavenging creatures are resourceful. But not serious. Not worthy of concern. It was a trade agreement mostly. Access to human agricultural technology in exchange for transit rights through our space. The humans wanted a cultural exchange component, a way to deepen ties between our peoples. My father, the patriarch of House Sauron, volunteered our family. He volunteered me. I will not pretend I was happy about it. I was the youngest daughter of a noble house, raised to believe I would marry a thalassary officer, someone tall and strong with silver-blue skin like mine, someone whose bloodline would strengthen ours. Instead, I was given to a human diplomat named Corbin Hale, a man who stood barely up to my shoulder, whose skin was the color of warm sand, and whose handshake felt like holding something made of paper. Two strangers sharing a residence and nothing more. I was wrong. Corbin Hale was, from the very first day, the most disarming person I had ever met. He arrived at my family's estate with a single bag, a warm smile, and a phrase he had clearly practiced in my language for weeks. He got the pronunciation slightly wrong, which made it sound like he was calling me a beautiful kitchen utensil instead of a beautiful soul, and he was so embarrassed when I told him that he laughed until his eyes watered. He learned everything: my language, my customs, the proper way to bow to an elder, the correct hand to use when offering tea, the significance of the prayer beads my mother left me. He studied our food and learned to cook 3 traditional thalassary dishes within his first month, adjusting the recipes to account for the differences between his digestive system and mine. He asked questions constantly. Not the shallow questions of someone trying to be polite. I could not help it. He was so gentle in a world that devoured gentleness without hesitation. The servants spoke over him. Minor officials ignored his presence in meetings. Even the household guards, who were supposed to protect him, treated him as an afterthought. He had no military record, no combat training that I could see, no presence that demanded attention when he entered a room. He moved through my world like a ghost, noticed only when someone needed something to mock. In Thalassari culture, a spouse's worth reflects on the house. Every time Corbin was dismissed, every time he was overlooked, every time a visiting dignitary spoke to me, as though he were not standing right beside me, it was a judgment on my family, on my father's decision, on me. And then Rothek Vaughn came to court. Rothek was not a man who played subtle games. He was a border province warlord, the ruler of 3 star systems at the edge of Thalassari space. And he had built his reputation on conquest and intimidation. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body layered with the dense muscle that our species develops in high-gravity environments. His face was a map of old scars, each one a story he enjoyed telling. He wore his rank like a second skin, and every room he entered rearranged itself around him. He had been circling my family for years. House Sohran controlled a valuable stretch of territory along the neutral zone, a region rich in mineral deposits and strategically vital for trade routes. My father had held that territory through political skill and old alliances, but my father was dying. His strength was fading, his allies were drifting away, and Rothek could smell the weakness the way a predator smells blood on the wind. My marriage to Corbin was, for Rothek, a gift. It was everything he needed to justify what he had been planning. A soft, clawless, smiling alien, sitting at the table of a founding house. It was an insult to tradition, to strength, to everything the Thalassari valued, and Rothek intended to use it. He arrived at court with a retinue of 50 warriors and a formal grievance claim already prepared. A grievance claim is an old legal mechanism in our system, a way for one house to challenge another's right to hold territory based on a demonstrated failure of honor. It had not been used seriously in generations, but the law was still on the books, and Rothek knew every line of it. He filed the claim on his 3rd day at court. He stood before the assembled nobility and declared that House Soran had degraded its bloodline by accepting a human into its ranks. He called it a contamination of the founding legacy. He said that any house that would take a creature without claws, without honor, without the capacity for battle as a partner, had forfeited its right to hold territory in the name of the sovereignty. He said all of this while looking directly at Corbin. And Corbin, standing beside me, listened to every word with the same expression he wore when he was reading a book or watching rain fall on the courtyard stones. Calm, attentive, unreadable. That night, in our quarters, I could not contain myself. I paced the length of our bedroom, my tail lashing behind me, my claws clicking against the stone floor. I told Corbin that we were in danger, real danger. My father was too ill to fight the claim. My elder brother had died in a border skirmish 2 cycles ago. My sister had married into a distant house and wanted nothing to do with the mess our family had become. There was no one left to stand for House Soran. No one except me. And a human husband who the entire court viewed as the problem. He waited until I had exhausted myself, until I stood before him trembling with frustration and fear, and then he reached out and took my hand. "Don't worry about Rothek," he said. I stared at him. "Don't worry? Corbin, he is going to take everything. Our home, our territory, our name, and he is using you to do it." "I know," Corbin said. His voice was quiet, the way it always was. Steady, even, like the surface of deep water. "I know exactly what he's doing." "Then what do we do?" He squeezed my hand once and let go. "We let him think he's winning." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until that maddening calm cracked and something real came out. This was not a trade negotiation. This was not a cultural exchange event where you could solve problems with good food and patient conversation. This was survival. This was a warlord with an army at his back coming to take our home. And my husband's response was to sit on the bed and tell me not to worry. Beside me, Corbin slept peacefully, his breathing slow and even, his face as calm in sleep as it was in waking. If Rothek won, House Soharan would lose everything my family had held for 12 generations. I had no army. I had no champion. He read the posting quietly, nodded once as if confirming something he already knew, and then turned to me. I need to visit the Trade Commission offices today, he said, and the Communications Archive. And I'd like to speak with Overseer Delcan in the Shipping Registry, if you can arrange an introduction. I frowned. The Shipping Registry? Corbin. We need to find a legal advocate. We need to build a defense. We need allies. I know, he said. That's what I'm doing. He kissed my cheek, the way he always did, gentle and brief, and walked away down the corridor. His footsteps made almost no sound. A servant passed him without a second glance. He turned a corner and was gone. I stood there alone. Something deeper and stranger, like the feeling you get when you realize you have been looking at a picture upside down, and the whole image is about to change. I threw myself into the traditional channels, the only paths I knew, and every single one of them turned to dust in my hands. I visited House Kael'thari first, one of my father's oldest allies. Lady Sovereign received me in her private study, which I took as a good sign, until I saw the look on her face. It was the expression of someone who had already decided, but wanted to go through the motions of listening before saying no. She let me speak for nearly an hour. I laid out the injustice of Rothek's claim, the transparency of his power grab, the danger that his precedent would set for every noble house. If a grievance claim could be filed based on who someone married, then no house was safe. Today it was a human spouse. Tomorrow it could be any deviation from whatever standard the strongest warlord decided to enforce. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "You make a compelling case, Valeth, but I cannot risk my house's standing by aligning with yours. Not while the human remains." "The human has a name," I said. "I'm sure he does." She paused. "You chose a pet over a partner. Now the wolves circle." Two refused to see me. One offered vague sympathies and nothing else. The last, a minor house with military connections, told me plainly that supporting House Sohran would be political suicide, and asked me not to contact them again. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. And while I was being turned away at every door in the sovereignty, my husband was doing something I did not understand. Corbin had begun taking meetings, not with lords or generals or legal advocates, with clerks, trade commission officials, records keepers, communications officers, the invisible functionaries who kept the machinery of the sovereignty running, the people that no Thelasari noble had ever thought to notice, much less befriend. He remembered their names, their children's names, the small details they had mentioned in passing weeks earlier. He sat in their offices and listened to their complaints about working conditions and outdated filing systems and the particular shade of paint in the East Wing that everyone hated but no one had bothered to change. And somewhere between the tea and the small talk, he asked questions. I came home each evening from another failed attempt at building alliances to find Corbin in his study, surrounded by papers and data pads, humming quietly to himself, as though he were planning a dinner party rather than watching our lives burn down. On the 8th day, I could not contain my frustration any longer. "What are you doing?" I demanded, standing in the doorway of his study. "I have spent a week begging for help. Every house has turned us away." Corbin looked up from his data pad. He did not seem offended. He rarely seemed anything except calm, which at that moment made me want to throw something at him. "The filing clerks are very helpful," he said. "Helpful for what?" "For understanding how things actually work here." He set the data pad down. "Valith, sit down, please." Something in his voice, not louder than usual, not sharper, but somehow different in a way I could not quite identify, made me sit. I pulled up a chair across from his desk and crossed my arms over my chest, my tail coiled tightly around the chair leg. But it only works when you have leverage, and right now, we don't. I know we don't have leverage. That's the problem. No, Corbin said. That's what Rothek thinks the problem is. The actual problem is that no one has looked at what Rothek is really doing. I frowned. He's making a power grab. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows he's making a power grab for territory. But why now? Why this specific legal mechanism? Why go through the formality of a grievance claim when he has the military strength to simply take what he wants? The Sovereignty Council is slow and unpredictable. A direct challenge would be faster and more certain for someone with his resources. So why is he choosing the slow path? I opened my mouth and then closed it. I had not thought about it that way. Because he needs the legal transfer, I said slowly. If he takes the territory by force, the other houses might unite against him, but if the council grants it through a lawful grievance, the transfer is permanent and uncontestable. Yes, but there's more to it than that. He doesn't just want the territory, he needs it. Specifically, he needs the jurisdictional authority that comes with it. Why? Corbin leaned forward. What happens under Thelisari law if a grievance claim is proven to have been filed under false pretenses? I blinked. The claimant's assets become forfeit to the accused house. Their territory, their holdings, everything tied to the claim reverts automatically. But that never happens. Proving false pretenses requires demonstrating that the claimant knew their basis was manufactured at the time of filing. It's nearly impossible. Corbin held my gaze. His brown eyes, so different from the silver of every Thelisari I had ever known, were very still. Nearly, he said. A silence fell between us that felt heavier than it should have. I studied his face, searching for the warmth I was used to, the gentle patience, the easy smile. It was all still there, but underneath it, like a current beneath calm water, I saw something I had never noticed before. Focus. Not the scattered attention of someone going through the motions. Real focus. The kind that does not blink. The kind that sees everything and calculates without ceasing. But in that moment, sitting across from him in his study, I had the sudden and unsettling feeling that I had been staring at the surface of an ocean and mistaking it for a puddle. "What do you need?" I asked. 3 days, he said. "And your trust." I wanted to ask what he was planning. I wanted to demand details, timelines, contingencies. Every instinct in my training told me to take control, to lead, to not surrender the direction of my house's future to anyone, least of all a human, with no military record and no political standing. But something in his voice stopped the question before it left my throat. Not authority, not command. Something quieter and far more unsettling. Certainty. The absolute, unwavering certainty of someone who has already seen the entire board and knows exactly where every piece will end up. 3 days, I said. He nodded. Then he picked up his data pad, took a sip of tea, and went back to work. I left his study and walked to the courtyard where my family's shrine stood. The ancient stone altar, carved with the names of every Sohran who had held this land. Rothek's enforcer had cracked one of the pillars during his visit the week before. No one had repaired it yet. The crack ran through the middle of my grandmother's name like a wound. I placed my hand on the broken stone and tried to understand what was happening. My husband, the man I had pitied for his softness, the man I had loved, despite what I believed was his weakness, had just looked at me with the eyes of someone playing an entirely different game than the one I thought we were in. For 3 days, Corbin disappeared into the machinery of the sovereignty. I do not mean that literally. He was physically present at every meal, in our quarters each night, as warm and attentive as he always was. But his mind was somewhere else. I could see it in the way he paused sometimes in the middle of a sentence, his eyes going distant for half a second before snapping back. I could see it in the datapads he carried everywhere, in the quiet conversations he had on secure communication channels when he thought I was asleep. He sent a formal demand to our estate, requesting that Corbin present himself before the warlord's retinue for what Rothek called an evaluation of fitness. It was a humiliation tactic, nothing more. A way to force the human to stand before a room full of warriors and be judged, measured, found lacking. I intercepted the message before Corbin could see it. I intended to refuse on his behalf, to spare him the indignity. But when I went to find him, he was already in his study, reading a different copy of the same message. "I was going to refuse it for you," I said. "I know," he set it down. "But we're not going to refuse it. We're going to do something better." "What?" "We're going to invite him to dinner." I stared at him, as if he had suggested we jump out of an airlock. "Dinner. Here. Tomorrow evening, a formal reception, full traditional protocol. I'll handle the preparations." Corbin stood up from his desk and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountain range that bordered our estate, painting the peaks in shades of copper and violet. He stood there for a moment, silhouetted against the light, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Not louder, not harder, clearer, like something that had been slightly out of focus had suddenly sharpened. "Valeth, I need you to understand something. Everything that Rothek has done since he arrived here, every insult, every provocation, every move he's made, has been designed to get a reaction. He wants us emotional. He wants us desperate. He wants us making decisions from anger and fear, because angry, frightened people make mistakes. The one thing he does not want is for us to be calm. The one thing he cannot fight is patience. So yes, we're going to invite him to dinner. We're going to be gracious, generous, impeccable hosts. And by the end of the evening, he's going to hand us everything we need to end him. The way he said that last word sent something cold and electric down my spine. How? I whispered. Because I know what he's hiding. And tomorrow night, I'm going to make him tell the whole room. The dinner was the most extraordinary performance I have ever witnessed. Corbin spent the entire day preparing. He selected the menu, arranged the seating, chose the music, and briefed the serving staff with a level of detail that bordered on obsessive. Every element had a purpose. The seating placed Rothek in a position of apparent honor, but actually isolated him from his advisors. The wine selection included 3 vintages from regions that bordered the neutral zone, a subtle reminder of the territory at stake. Even the lighting was adjusted to create what Corbin called conversational intimacy, which meant that everyone at the table felt important and slightly exposed at the same time. I watched all of this with a growing sense of unreality. My husband, the man who could not make a servant look twice at him, was orchestrating an event with the precision of a military campaign. The guests arrived. Rothek came with 6 of his senior warriors, all of them armed, all of them radiating the casual menace of people who were used to being the most dangerous things in any room. Corbin greeted them at the door personally, bowing in perfect traditional form, his pronunciation of the formal welcomes flawless. Rothek looked amused, like a man watching a small animal perform tricks. He asked Rothek about his campaigns, his territory, his ambitions for the border regions. He listened intently. He laughed at the right moments. He deferred with the right amount of grace. And he asked questions. Not aggressive questions, not challenging questions. The kind of soft, curious, almost admiring questions that made Rothek want to talk more, boast more, Explain more. How had the warlord managed such impressive growth in his resource output over the past cycle? What was his strategy for managing the complexities of neutral zone trade? Did he find the current shipping regulations helpful or restrictive? Rothek, warmed by wine and flattery, and the intoxicating pleasure of hearing himself praised by the very creature he intended to destroy, answered everything. He talked about his operations with the pride of a man who had built something enormous and wanted everyone to know it. He dropped details about shipping routes, resource yields, operational timelines. He contradicted his public filings without realizing it. He confirmed knowledge of regions and operations that his official position said he had nothing to do with. I sat across the table, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching Corbin pour another glass of wine with steady hands and a warm smile. He looked like the perfect host. Attentive, generous, harmless. But I could see it now. I could see what I had been blind to for all the months of our marriage. Every question was a thread, and Corbin was weaving them into a net so fine and so tight that Rothek could not feel it closing around him. The warlord was trapped in a web of his own words, and he did not even know it. By the end of the evening, Rothek had contradicted his own grievance filing 3 separate times. He had confirmed specific details about operations in the asteroid belt that his public records said he had no involvement in, and he had insulted House Sohran in terms that, under the specific legal framework of a formal reception held under traditional protocol, constituted what is called a secondary offense, a separate actionable violation that could be added to a counterclaim. Corbin had arranged for the entire dinner to be recorded under the standard hospitality documentation protocol, a routine practice that no one ever paid attention to because no one ever said anything incriminating at dinner parties. Until now. The guests left. The warriors filed out. Rothek shook Corbin's hand at the door and told him he made excellent wine selections. Corbin thanked him and wished him a restful night. When the doors closed and we were alone, I stood in the dining hall surrounded by empty glasses and half-eaten plates, and I stared at my husband. He had already begun clearing dishes, stacking plates with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. "How long have you known?" I asked. My voice came out smaller than I intended. He did not look up. Since the second day he was here. The second day. He's been here for almost 3 weeks. And you've known since the second day? Yes. And the clerks. The trade officials. The shipping registry. All those meetings. He's been strip mining deposits that fall under our house's protective jurisdiction. The grievance claim isn't about honor or bloodline contamination. It's about transferring jurisdictional authority before anyone audits the mining operations. I sank into a chair. It's about money. It's always about money, Valeth, or resources, or strategic advantage. Honor is the story people tell to make the grab look noble. This small, gentle, soft-spoken man, who had just dismantled a warlord's entire scheme, using nothing but tea, conversation, and a dinner party. "Who are you?" I whispered. Not in fear, in wonder. He finally looked up. His brown eyes met mine, and for a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped. I saw something behind his warmth that was not warmth at all. It was not cruelty. It was not malice. It was depth. A vast, calculated, endlessly patient depth that I had been floating on the surface of without ever knowing what lay beneath. "Corbin," I said carefully, "what exactly were you before you were a diplomat?" He held my gaze for a long time. The candles flickered. Somewhere outside, a night bird called into the darkness. "I was the person they sent," he said quietly, when diplomacy had already failed. Then he picked up the serving cart and wheeled it toward the kitchen, humming softly, and I sat alone in the silence he left behind, feeling the ground beneath my feet shift in a way that told me nothing would ever look the same again. The next morning, Corbin laid everything on our dining table. Not food, evidence. Trade manifests going back 14 months. Communication logs between Rothek's private channels and 3 shell operations registered in neutral space. Financial records that traced payment flows from the asteroid belt directly into accounts controlled by Rothek's inner circle. Shipping schedules that showed a fleet of unmarked mining vessels operating in a region that, by every law of the sovereignty, was under the protective jurisdiction of House Soharan. Beside the datapads sat the recording from last night's dinner. Time-stamped and authenticated under formal hospitality protocol, Corbin had marked 7 specific moments in the conversation. 7 places where Rothek's own words directly contradicted his official filing, confirmed knowledge of operations he had publicly denied, or constituted legal violations under the framework of the reception. It was meticulous. It was devastating. And it had been assembled in less than 72 hours by a man that the entire Thalassari court thought was decorative. "Where did you learn to do this?" I asked. Corbin was standing by the window, drinking his morning tea. He turned and looked at me with that calm expression I was beginning to understand differently. It was not passivity, it was containment. We send them to places where people are trying to hide things, places where the surface is polite and the undercurrent is dangerous. You learn to read rooms. You learn to read people. You learn that the most valuable information in any interaction is the thing the other person is trying not to say. He took a sip of tea. And you learn that the people with the most power are rarely the most informed. The clerks, the administrators, the functionaries, they see everything. They process every document, file every record, route every communication. And nobody pays attention to them, which means nobody is careful around them. He had been building an intelligence network from the invisible framework of the sovereignty, using skills that no Thalassari would recognize as dangerous, because they did not come with a blade. "This is enough to destroy Rothek," I said. "Not yet." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean, not yet?" "This proves his entire grievance is based on false pretenses. The asteroid mining alone is a sovereign violation. And if we present it now, Rothek's allies on the council will bury it. He has 3 council members who benefit from his operations, maybe more. If we submit this evidence through normal channels, it gets reviewed by a committee. That committee includes people who have every reason to make it disappear. We need something that can't be buried. We need Rothek to commit to his lie in a public forum, on the record, and then we need to pull the floor out from under him in front of everyone." "How?" "I'm going to file a formal counterclaim," Corbin said. "Under Section 14 of the Sovereignty's Territorial Jurisprudence Code, a respondent to a grievance claim can submit a counter-accusation of fraudulent filing. The filing triggers an automatic tribunal hearing before the full council. No committee, no private review, public testimony, public evidence, public judgment. Under the standard marriage provisions, no. But under the Diplomatic Exchange Amendment of the 43rd cycle, foreign nationals married into a sovereignty house, as part of a recognized treaty arrangement, retain the legal standing of their origin government's diplomatic corps. Which means I don't file as a consort. I file as a representative of the Earth Diplomatic Service, acting on behalf of a treaty partner house. I blinked. Your legal archives are extensive, and the search function is surprisingly good once you figure out the indexing system. 4 hours, I repeated. You found a legal loophole that has probably existed for decades that no Thelisari lawyer has ever used, in 4 hours. Corbin shrugged. Your lawyers weren't looking for it. They're trained in how the system is supposed to work. I was trained in how systems actually work. There's a difference. He set down his tea and walked to the table, pulling up a specific data pad. I've drafted the counterclaim. I'd like you to review the language. I wrote it in Old Thelisari legal form, because the tribunal protocol requires it, and I want to make sure my grammar is correct. Some of the verb conjugations in the formal accusative mood are tricky. I took the data pad and read the document he had prepared. It was written in perfect Old Thelisari, the archaic legal dialect that most modern Thelisari struggled to compose in. The language was precise, elegant, and devastating. Every accusation was supported by cited evidence. Every legal reference was accurate. The structure followed the traditional form so closely that it could have been written by a sovereignty arbiter. My husband, the human who had been in Thelisari space for less than one standard cycle, had produced a legal document of higher quality than most native practitioners could manage. And he was asking me to check his verb conjugations. Corbin, I said slowly, how many languages do you speak? Fluently? 7. Conversationally? 12. I can read about 20, with varying degrees of accuracy. I put the data pad down. Why didn't you ever tell me this? He looked at me with something that might have been sadness, or might have been patience so deep, it only looked like sadness from the outside. And careful people are very hard to read. The counterclaim was filed that afternoon. I accompanied Corbin to the council hall, walking 2 steps behind him by tradition, watching the reactions as he submitted the document to the arbiter's office. The clerk who received it read the first page, paused, read it again, and then looked up at Corbin with an expression I had never seen directed at my husband before. The clerk excused herself and returned with the senior arbiter, a stern old woman named Counselor Vethan, who had presided over territorial disputes for 30 cycles. She read the filing in its entirety, while Corbin stood before her desk, hands folded, patient as stone. When she finished, she looked at him over the top of the document. "You wrote this?" "I did." I could see her recalculating, the same way I had been recalculating for days now, adjusting the image of the man in front of her to accommodate information that did not fit the expected shape. We left the council hall and walked back across the central plaza in silence. The sun was high, the stone warm beneath our feet, and the city hummed with the ordinary business of a civilization that did not know it was about to be shaken. Halfway across the plaza, I took Corbin's hand. It was small in mine. His fingers were slender and smooth where mine were long and tipped with retractable claws. But his grip was steady, and his hand was warm, and I held it tightly. "Are you afraid?" I asked. He considered the question honestly, the way he considered everything. "No, but I'm aware of what's coming. Rothek won't accept this quietly. He'll try to turn the tribunal into something physical. That's his ground, and he knows it." "And then what?" Corbin squeezed my hand. "And then I'll handle it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust the certainty in his voice, the depth behind his calm, the evidence of capability he had revealed piece by piece over the past week. But I had seen Rothek's warriors. I had seen the warlord himself, the sheer physical mass of him, the scars that mapped a lifetime of combat. Whatever Corbin had been before he was a diplomat, he was still a human. He was still small and breakable and soft. I held his hand tighter and said nothing, and we walked home through the sunlight while the clock counted down. The news of the counterclaim spread through the court like fire through dry grass. By evening, everyone knew. A human had filed a formal accusation of fraud against one of the most powerful warlords in the sovereignty, using an obscure legal provision that no one had ever seen invoked by an off-worlder. The reactions were split. Some found it amusing, a curiosity, a novelty to discuss over drinks. Others found it offensive, an alien overstepping his place, meddling in affairs he had no business touching. A few, a very few, found it interesting. I noticed glances directed at Corbin that were different from the ones he usually received. Not warmer, sharper, assessing. He sent a formal message to our estate, addressed directly to Corbin, that said simply, "I look forward to seeing you on the tribunal floor, little animal. Bring your paperwork. I'll bring something more persuasive." Corbin read the message at breakfast, took a sip of tea, and set it aside. "He's going to challenge me to a dominance contest," he said, as casually as if he were predicting the weather. "A dominance contest?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Corbin? Do you know what that is?" "A physical confrontation under traditional law." "The parties fight until one is unable to continue. No time limit. No weapons restrictions for the challenger. The winner's position is upheld by the council without further deliberation." that he has claws that can cut through combat armor. Yes. And you're not concerned. Valeth, I need you to understand something about humans. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest, or the most armored, or the most naturally dangerous. But we have one quality that no other species seems to account for, and it's this: we don't stop. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was lower and more focused than I had ever heard it. Every species in the galaxy fights until the situation changes, until the advantage shifts, or the risk becomes too high, or the calculation says that continuing is no longer rational. And at that point, they stop. They retreat. They surrender. They make the logical choice. Humans don't do that. We keep going past the point of reason, past the point of advantage, past the point where any sane creature would quit. That's not courage. It's not madness. It's something else entirely, something that every civilization we've ever encountered has struggled to name. He doesn't know what that looks like. He's about to find out. He left the room, and I sat at the table with cold tea and a fear in my chest so sharp it felt like a physical thing lodged between my ribs. Not fear for what might happen to my husband, fear of what I was beginning to understand about him. Fear that the man I had loved for his gentleness was about to show me what lived beneath it, and that I would never be able to unsee it. The tribunal convened on the 6th day, as scheduled. The council hall was filled to capacity. Every noble house had sent representatives. The gallery was packed with observers, minor officials, military attachés, trade delegates, and what seemed like half the court staff. Word had spread not just about the legal dispute, but about the human who had filed the counterclaim, and everyone wanted to see what would happen. I sat in the family gallery, my hands clenched in my lap, my breath shallow. Below me, the tribunal floor was a wide circle of polished stone, ringed by the elevated seats of the 7 council arbiters. Councillor Vethon presided from the central chair, her face unreadable. Rothek entered first, flanked by his warriors, armed in full ceremonial dress. He moved through the chamber like a storm front, his presence filling the space, his confidence radiating outward like heat. He took his position on the tribunal floor and stood with his arms crossed, scanning the room with the expression of a man who owned it. Then Corbin entered. He was alone. He wore no armor. He carried no weapon, no ceremonial blade, no shield. He was dressed in simple formal attire, the same kind of clothing he wore to dinner parties. His footsteps were quiet on the stone floor. He walked to his position and stood with his hands at his sides, looking up at the council with an expression of calm attention. The murmurs in the gallery were audible. This small, soft, unarmed human, standing on the tribunal floor, across from a warlord twice his size. It looked absurd. It looked like a mistake. Several of the arbiters exchanged glances. Counselor Vethon called the proceedings to order. She outlined the original grievance claim, Corbin's counterclaim, and the evidence to be presented. She asked Rothek if he stood by his original filing. "I do," Rothek said, his voice booming in the chamber, "and I question the standing of this creature to file anything before this council." Counselor Vethon held up the Diplomatic Exchange Amendment. "His standing has been verified under established law. Proceed." Corbin stepped forward. He addressed the council in Old Thalassary so precise and so fluent that I saw two of the arbiters lean back in their chairs. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture or pace or perform. He simply spoke, and the words filled the chamber like pressure. He laid out the case, point by point, evidence by evidence. He presented the shipping manifests that showed Rothek's private fleet operating in the protected asteroid belt. He presented the financial records that traced profits from illegal mining directly to the warlord's personal accounts. He presented the communication logs that showed Rothek coordinating the operation while simultaneously filing a grievance claim designed to transfer jurisdiction before anyone noticed. And then he presented the recording from the dinner. He played Rothek's own words back to the chamber. 7 moments where the warlord had confirmed knowledge of the asteroid operations. 3 instances where he had directly contradicted his official filing. 1 passage where he had described the timeline of his plan in enough detail that even the most sympathetic arbiter could not pretend it was ambiguous. The chamber was silent, the kind of silence that has weight. The gallery was motionless, hundreds of eyes watching a human take apart a warlord's entire position, with nothing but words and evidence, and the steady, relentless precision of someone who had prepared for this moment from the very beginning. When Corbin finished his presentation, he returned to his position and waited. No dramatic pause, no closing argument. The evidence spoke for itself, and he respected the council enough to let it. He turned to the council and began speaking rapidly, dismissing the evidence, attacking Corbin's character, questioning the authenticity of the recordings. His voice grew louder with each sentence. His claws extended involuntarily, scraping against the stone floor. Corbin did not interrupt. He waited until Rothek paused for breath, and then he addressed the council in that same calm, measured voice. Let the record show that the claimant's response to documented evidence is personal attack in volume. This is consistent with the pattern of behavior outlined in my filing. Rothek spun toward Corbin. For a moment, I thought he was going to attack right there, before the challenge was even formally issued. His warriors tensed. The gallery held its breath. But Rothek was not a fool. He knew that striking an unarmed respondent on the tribunal floor without a formal challenge would cost him everything. So he did the thing that Corbin had known he would do from the beginning. He invoked the dominance contest. Let the tribunal floor become the arena. Unless the human lacks the courage to face me, every rational part of my mind was screaming at Corbin to refuse, to let the evidence speak, to not throw everything away by stepping into a physical contest with a being that could break him in half. Corbin looked up at the council. Then he looked across the floor at Rothek, this towering, scarred, armored warlord who had never lost a fight in his life. I accept, he said. No hesitation, no pause, no waver in his voice. He said it the way you state a fact that requires no deliberation, the way you confirm something you decided long ago. The chamber erupted in noise. The arbiters conferred quickly. Councillor Vethon called for order and announced that the dominance contest would take place the following morning in the arena beneath the council hall. Through all of it, Corbin stood perfectly still on the tribunal floor. He did not look at Rothek. He did not look at the crowd. He looked up at me. He did not smile. He did not try to reassure me. He simply met my eyes and nodded once. A single, small movement. And in that nod, I saw something I had never seen in my husband before. Not kindness, not patience, not the gentle warmth that had made me love him. Something older and harder and more frightening than anything I had encountered in my life. permission. As if he had been holding something back behind that calm exterior every single day of our marriage. Every time he smiled at an insult, every time he turned the other cheek, every time he chose softness over sharpness and patience over pride, he had been containing something, choosing, deliberately and consciously, not to let it out. And now, looking up at me from the tribunal floor, he was giving himself permission to stop. The arena beneath the council hall was old. Older than the building above it, older than the current legal system, older than most of the noble houses whose representatives now filled the stone galleries carved into its walls. It had been built in an age when the Thalassari settled their disputes with their bodies, when strength was not a metaphor, but a literal measure of worth. The floor was rough stone, worn smooth in the center by centuries of combat. The air smelled like mineral dust and something deeper, something that had soaked into the rock over generations. Around me, the seats were filled. Every noble house, every military commander, every council member. This was the event of the season, the spectacle that would be discussed for years. A human fighting a Thalassari warlord in a dominance contest. Most of them had come to watch a curiosity, a brief, entertaining mismatch before the inevitable conclusion. I could see the bets being placed. Quiet exchanges of credits and favors in the gallery rows. No one was betting on Corbin. The odds were not merely against him. They were considered so irrelevant that some were wagering on how quickly it would end, rather than who would win. In his hands, he carried two curved blades, not long swords but heavy, hooked instruments, designed for close-quarters grappling, for catching limbs and controlling an opponent's movement. His body moved with the practiced ease of a fighter who had been doing this since before Corbin's species had developed space travel. The crowd acknowledged him with a low murmur of approval. He was a known quantity, a proven warrior. He walked to the center of the arena and planted his feet and waited. Then the west gate opened, and Corbin stepped through. He wore nothing, no armor, no protection, simple clothing, loose-fitting, practical. His feet were bare on the stone, his hands were empty. The murmur in the crowd shifted, not approval, disbelief. Several of the arbiters leaned forward. Counselor Vethon, presiding from the central gallery position, spoke into the silence. The respondent enters without arms or armor. Under the rules of the dominance contest, the respondent has the right to bear equivalent weaponry. Does the respondent wish to arm himself? Corbin looked up at her. No, he said. I do not. More murmuring. I could see confusion on the faces around me, and beneath the confusion, the uncomfortable stirring of people who were beginning to suspect they had misunderstood something fundamental about the situation. Rothek laughed. So be it. I'll try to make it quick. Counselor Vethon raised her hand. The dominance contest between Commander Rothek Vaughn and Respondent Corbin Hale will proceed under traditional rules. The contest ends when one party is physically unable to continue. There are no other conditions for conclusion. Begin. She dropped her hand. Rothek moved immediately. He was fast for his size, terrifyingly fast, closing the distance between them in 3 enormous strides, his blades sweeping in a wide arc designed to end the fight before it started. Corbin was not there. He moved like nothing I had ever seen, not the explosive speed of a Thelasari warrior, not the brute acceleration that comes from dense muscle and heavy bone. Something different, something fluid, and efficient, and precise. Like every motion had been calculated to use exactly the energy required, and not a fraction more. He sidestepped Rothek's charge with a movement so economical it barely looked like movement at all, and as the warlord's momentum carried him forward, Corbin's hand shot out and struck a point on Rothek's inner arm, just below the elbow, where the nerve cluster runs close to the surface. Rothek's right hand spasmed. The blade wobbled in his grip. It lasted only a second before his fingers recovered, but the arena had gone silent. He was not defending, he was reading. I could see it in his eyes, that same terrifying focus I had glimpsed in his study, amplified now to its full intensity. He was studying Rothek's movements in real time, cataloging his patterns, his footwork, his recovery speed, the way he shifted weight between strikes. Rothek adjusted and came at him again, faster this time, using both blades in a scissoring pattern that was designed to trap an opponent between converging lines of attack. It was a technique I had seen Thalassari champions use in tournament matches. It was nearly impossible to escape. Corbin dropped under it, not away from it, under it. He went low with a speed that defied his small frame, and as Rothek's blades crossed through the space where his torso had been a heartbeat earlier, Corbin struck again. Two rapid blows, one to the outside of Rothek's left knee, one to the nerve junction at the base of his tail. Both targets were precise. Both were places I did not know were vulnerable until I saw the effect. His tail went rigid with involuntary muscle contraction. He recovered quickly, spinning with a backhand strike that grazed Corbin's shoulder and drew a thin line of red across his clothing. It should have been satisfaction, the confirmation of an expected outcome. Instead, it was uncertainty. Blood seeped from the cut on his shoulder, but his expression had not changed. That calm, clear, focused expression that I now understood was not the absence of emotion, but the presence of something so concentrated that emotion could not survive in it. He was not angry. He was not afraid. He was operational. Every filter, every social layer, every warm and gentle mask he wore for the world had been set aside, and what remained was competence so pure it looked like something else entirely. Rothek came again, and again, and again. He was strong and fast and skilled, and he landed hits. A blade caught Corbin across the ribs, opening a cut that bled freely. A sweeping kick connected with his thigh and sent him staggering. An elbow strike caught him across the jaw, and I saw his head snap to the side with a force that would have ended the fight for most beings. Corbin took it. All of it. He bled. He staggered. He took impacts that would have broken bones in a lesser frame, and he did not stop. That was when the atmosphere in the arena began to change. It started as a subtle thing, a shift in the quality of the silence. The crowd had come expecting a quick spectacle. They were not getting one. The human was not collapsing. He was not curling up on the floor. He was not begging for it to end. He was absorbing damage that would have dropped a Thalassari fighter, and continuing to move, continuing to strike, continuing to target those precise, devastating nerve points with a relentlessness that had no equivalent in Thalassari combat tradition. Because Rothek was slowing. Not dramatically, not in a way that an untrained eye would notice. But I could see it, and from the way the experienced warriors in the gallery were leaning forward, they could see it too. Every nerve strike Corbin landed was cumulative. The hand that had spasmed was losing its grip faster each time. The knee that had buckled was taking longer to stabilize. The tail that had gone rigid was beginning to drag. Corbin was not trying to overpower Rothek. He was systematically shutting down the warlord's body, one nerve cluster, one tendon junction, one pressure point at a time. He knew where the pain centers were. He knew which tendons controlled grip strength. He knew the recovery time of Thalassari muscle fibers down to the second, and was timing his strikes to hit before the previous damage could heal. He was not fighting a warrior. He was disassembling a machine. The understanding that this small, bleeding, unarmed human was not getting lucky. He was executing a strategy, and the strategy was working. The warlord abandoned technique. He threw himself at Corbin with raw, furious force, swinging wildly, trying to use his sheer mass advantage to end it. He landed a devastating blow to Corbin's side that I heard from the gallery, a hollow, sickening impact that should have shattered ribs. Corbin went down. The crowd surged. Rothek raised both blades for a finishing strike. And Corbin got up. He got up the way that humans get up, not with grace, not with the smooth recovery of a trained fighter. He simply rose, one hand on the ground, then one knee, then both feet, bleeding from a dozen cuts, his side already swelling from the impact, his breathing ragged and strained. He rose, and he looked at Rothek with those calm brown eyes, and he did not stop. The gallery went still in a way that had nothing to do with anticipation and everything to do with recognition. They were seeing something they had never seen before, something that did not exist in their experience, in their combat records, in their understanding of how living things behaved. They were seeing a creature that had passed the point of rational surrender and simply continued. Rothek hesitated. For the first time in his life, perhaps, he hesitated. Because he had hit this human with everything he had, and the human had gotten up, and there was nothing in Rothek's experience that told him what to do next. In that hesitation, Corbin struck. Three movements. So fast they looked like one. A strike to the inside of Rothek's right wrist that finally broke his grip on the blade. A two-fingered jab to the nerve cluster beneath the warlord's jaw that sent a cascade of pain signals through his facial muscles and temporarily disrupted his equilibrium. And a driving knee strike to the weakened left leg, the same knee he had been targeting throughout the fight, the joint that had absorbed 5 cumulative nerve hits and could no longer support the warlord's weight under sudden impact. Rothek fell. He hit the stone floor like a tower collapsing, his left leg folding beneath him, his remaining blade skittering across the arena. He tried to rise, his body obeying the instinct that had driven him through a lifetime of combat, but his muscles were not responding correctly. Corbin's systematic targeting had corrupted the signals between Rothek's brain and his limbs. He was not unconscious. He was not defeated in the traditional sense. He was simply unable to make his body do what he demanded of it. His side was swollen, his jaw was bruising, one eye was half closed from a strike I had not even seen land. He looked broken. He looked like he should be on the ground himself, unconscious, finished, done. But he was standing, and Rothek was not. The arena was absolutely silent. No murmurs, no shifting, no breathing that I could hear. 2,000 Thelisari watched a bleeding human stand over their fallen warlord, and not one of them made a sound. Corbin looked down at Rothek, and then he did something that broke every expectation in the room one final time. He extended his hand. He reached down with his bloodied, shaking hand and offered to help Rothek up. The same hand that had dismantled the warlord's body offered to restore his dignity. It was not mockery. I could see Corbin's face from where I sat, and there was nothing in it but sincerity. He had done what he needed to do, and now the fight was over, and his first instinct was kindness. Rothek stared at the offered hand. I watched the warlord's face cycle through emotions that I suspect he had never experienced in sequence before. Shock, confusion, something that might have been shame, and finally, a deep, bone-level understanding that he had been wrong about something fundamental, and that the wrongness ran deeper than this fight, deeper than this dispute, all the way down to the assumptions that had shaped his entire worldview. He did not take the hand. He turned his head away, and Corbin let his arm drop, and the fight was over. Counselor Vethon rose from her gallery seat. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade of its own. The dominance contest is concluded. The respondent stands. The council recognizes the result. She paused, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of law. Under Section 14 of the Territorial Jurisprudence Code, all assets and holdings tied to the claim are hereby forfeit to House Sauron. The neutral zone violations will be referred to the Sovereignty's Enforcement Division for investigation. This ruling is final and uncontestable. The chamber erupted. I barely heard it. I was already moving, pushing through the gallery, down the narrow stairs that led to the arena floor. I pushed past guards and officials and people who tried to stop me, and I ran across the stone floor to where my husband stood, swaying slightly on his feet, covered in blood that was almost entirely his own. I caught him before he fell. His weight was nothing against mine. I held him, his head against my shoulder, his blood staining my clothing, and I felt his breathing slow as the adrenaline began to leave his system and the pain began to arrive. "Are you all right?" I whispered. A foolish question. He was clearly not all right. He managed a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a groan. "I could use some tea," he said. I carried him out of the arena, not because he asked me to, because I wanted everyone who watched us leave to see it. A Thelisari noblewoman carrying her human husband in her arms, holding him like something precious, something worth fighting for. Let them stare. Let them reassess. Let them begin the long, uncomfortable process of understanding what they had just witnessed. That evening, I found Corbin in our quarters, sitting on the edge of our bed, carefully cleaning and bandaging his wounds. The medical staff had treated the worst of it, the cracked ribs, the deep cuts, the bruised jaw, but he had insisted on finishing the smaller injuries himself. He was methodical about it, precise, the way he was precise about everything. I sat beside him and watched him work, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been building in me since the moment he had stepped onto the tribunal floor. "Why did you never show me this? Any of this? The intelligence work, the legal knowledge, the fighting. Why did you let everyone, including me, believe you were harmless?" He finished taping a bandage across his ribs and set the medical kit aside. He sat quietly for a moment, looking at his hands, these small, blunt, clawless human hands that had taken apart a warlord without a weapon. It's what I'm capable of. There's a difference. He looked at me, and his brown eyes were warm again. The depth was still there, the vast competence, the calculating focus, but it was contained again, held behind the warmth by choice. By deliberate, daily, conscious choice. On Earth, he continued, we have a concept. We say that being kind and being weak are not the same thing. Kindness without the capacity for something harder is just helplessness. But kindness from someone who could choose to be terrible and doesn't, that's something else entirely. That's strength. The real kind. The kind you choose. And when I came here, to your world, I chose to lead with the gentle part, because that's who I want to be, not because I can't be something else, because I don't want to be something else. He squeezed my hand. You didn't marry a pet, Valeth. You married a man who decided, a long time ago, that the measure of strength isn't what you can destroy, it's what you can protect. Not just love, though I loved him more fiercely in that moment than I had at any point in our marriage. Not just pride, though I was proud with a ferocity that burned in my chest like a second heartbeat. In the days that followed, the court changed around us. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the slow, tectonic way that fundamental shifts happen. People looked at Corbin differently, not with the contempt they had shown before, not with fear, exactly, though there was some of that, with a cautious, uncertain respect, the kind that comes when you realize you have been standing next to something powerful and did not know it. Counselor Vethon invited Corbin to consult on 3 pending territorial disputes. 2 noble houses that had refused to meet with me sent formal requests for partnership discussions. A military commander who had once called Corbin Valeth's exotic pet, in my hearing, approached him at a public function, stood silently for a moment, and then bowed in the full traditional form of equals. Corbin accepted it all, with the same grace he had shown before. The same warm smile, the same patient attention, the same quiet kindness that had drawn me to him in the first place. Nothing about his daily behavior changed. He still made tea for the household staff. He still learned the names of everyone he met. He still cooked dinner, and asked me about my day, and laughed at his own terrible pronunciation of Thalassary idioms. But everyone knew now, everyone had seen, and in the knowing, everything was different. I think about what the galaxy believes about humans, that they are small, that they are fragile, that they are soft, emotional creatures who stumbled into the stars by accident, and will eventually be absorbed or outcompeted by the older, harder civilizations around them. They are wrong. They are so fundamentally, so completely wrong that it borders on the tragic. They have the capacity for extraordinary things, things that would frighten even the most battle-hardened Thalassari warrior, and they choose, every day, consciously and deliberately, to be gentle instead. They lead with kindness, not because they lack alternatives, but because they have looked at all the alternatives and decided that kindness is better. And when they stop being kind, when something they love is threatened, when the gentleness is no longer enough, and the situation demands what lives beneath it, the galaxy learns why every species that ever underestimated humanity only made that mistake once. He learns languages so he can compliment people in their mother tongue. He remembers the names of servants' children and asks about their schoolwork. He cooks meals for people who have insulted him and means every generous gesture without reservation. And that, I have come to understand, is the most terrifying thing about him.